Hi everyone, welcome to my presentation. Today I'll be taking you through the design process of my vocabulary app, and I'll be finishing with some thoughts on how the project went and how this will affect my work in the future. Now, this app has been created with a specific target market in mind, and I'd like to begin by introducing you to a fictional representation of that target market, a persona. This is Ben. Ben is an up-and-coming freelance photographer who lives in London, and he's looking for a challenge. In his words, "Sometimes I get to work projects that take me overseas. Being able to understand more of what's going on around me would be a professional and personal plus." So Ben has an objective. He wants to develop basic communication skills in languages of his choice so he can engage with the people and culture when working abroad. However, for us to design a vocabulary app that will truly help Ben, we need to consider the world that he lives in. As a freelancer, a hectic schedule with unexpected or short pockets of free time is Ben's day-to-day. And as previously mentioned, Ben's looking for a challenge, but like the best of us, he's also vulnerable to lapses in motivation. Now, Ben's aptitude for photography indicates a well-developed visual memory, but he also has a good ear. This is important when considering that he will be exposed to both visual and verbal communication when abroad. And finally, Ben works in an industry that has a lot of niche terminology and vocabulary. All of this needs to be taken into account when crafting a solution. So here are some features that could be part of an app that would help Ben with his objective. Learning sessions of flexible time length could complement his lack of routine and would also respect his level of motivation in the moment. A reminder or alarm function might make it easier for him to remember to study, which can be difficult juggling a hectic schedule. But to properly address Ben's differing levels of motivation, the app could include adjustable difficulty settings for learning sessions. Verbal and visual learning methods will let him play to his dual strengths while also preparing him for real-life situations abroad. And finally, an option to add custom vocabulary will enable Ben to focus on relevant words unique to his work. From here, we move into prototyping with the aim of bundling these features into a coherent package. I'm thinking about the quickest ways to get Ben into the app and into a study session, how to depict different learning methods and at what point a user would want access to them. I'm also conscious of keeping Ben motivated, so I want to show the progress he's making as he practices. I'm considering an alarm function and where it could live within the app. And of course, I need to look at the study sessions themselves, along with a results display when Ben is finished. Before moving into testing, I built up some screens and flows for participants to try out, paired with a few tasks to see if the app was working as intended, beginning with a login to the app. The second task was for participants to prepare a new study session in which they would tailor the study settings before they began practicing. Task 3 was to complete said study session and then to view the results afterwards. Thinking back to Ben, task 4 asked the participants to add a vocabulary stack to the app's existing vocabulary collection, and task 5 was to set an alarm for a future study session. During the testing, a pattern started to emerge, highlighting two tasks that my participants were struggling with. Collating the participants' experiences, it became clear that when asked to prepare a study session, participants weren't making mistakes. They weren't doing anything, they were confused, I think for the following reasons. Looking at the related screens, the title fails to clearly explain what the participants are being asked to do. Below the title, the two dots for page navigation were almost always ignored because participants didn't realize they could be clicked. A smaller issue, but some participants found the order of the categories confusing, and they were similarly confused by the preview option, which many interpreted as a search function, and the progress bar, which some participants felt looked like it was inverted. Finally, when the preview was clicked, the resulting window containing the contents of a particular topic was hard to understand in context. So without knowing what to do and with no means of escaping, participants were getting stuck. On the right is a possible solution to address these issues. The page is now bookended with a more descriptive title at the top and navigation arrows at the bottom. A quick reorder of the categories makes sense, and an arrow leading to a drop-down menu to view the contents of a topic will hopefully feel more familiar to future test participants. Finally, a progress bar starting from the left definitely makes more sense. As for the second issue, adding vocabulary, the lack of a visual hierarchy meant participants couldn't tell the difference between an instruction and clickable options. This seems to be less of a structural issue and more of a UI visual problem, so some boldening of key instructions may be an effective solution. It's obvious at this stage that more testing will soon be necessary, but there are some other features that I'd like to incorporate before doing so, as I feel they could result in a smoother experience. Firstly, an onboarding tutorial will let the app retain some of its more sophisticated options without confusing users along the way. And researching ways to reduce the setup time for study sessions, maybe in the form of default settings or settings that can be saved for future use, will get students learning quicker. If the changes made to the setup process fail at future tests, then a major overhaul of that section might also be necessary. It's time to step back and evaluate the design process so far and see how my work at each stage has affected the quality of the language app. Starting with competitor analysis. As a designer, I am familiar with competitor analysis, which allowed me to gain valuable insight into what's already on the market, what works, and what doesn't. During user research, however, I got distracted by the details and missed out on discovering how my interviewees' lives affected their learning. And this made creating a user persona a challenge. Fortunately, having spent a lot of design time building personas, I was able to come up with something that felt consistent and well-rounded, but it was a bit of a struggle. User flows were a lesson for me. I was conscious that my lack of experience in UX resulted in difficulty maintaining objectivity. It really drove home the importance of the testing to come, as although I felt a flow made sense to me, I feared it may be subjective as I couldn't rely on past experience or data to keep me grounded. Prototyping, sketching, and wireframes put me back in familiar territory, and converting the user flows I'd come up with into a more graphic state enabled me to sand off some of the rough edges and hopefully see and correct for a little of the biased pathways I had created. My hardest lesson of the UX design process came in the final stage. I got great feedback from my participants, but I realized that as the tasks I'd given them were set up for a returning user, they desperately needed a solid base of context to get them started, which at times I had not provided, leading to unnecessary confusion. This evaluation sounds fairly damning, but I think it hides a more positive picture. The two issues highlighted really stick out because the vast majority of the app was a positive and unnoteworthy experience for the test participants. They found interacting with most of the app to be logical and intuitive, which for the moment I'm satisfied with. I've obviously learned a great deal during this project, but my main takeaway is that as a new UX designer, I have some knife edges to balance on. I learned that there's a fine line between giving test participants the information they need to attempt tasks and that task becoming a hand-holding exercise where they are guided much too heavily. The prototyping phase highlighted the importance of finding the sweet spot where a design is simple yet clear. Too much to one side and you fall into oversimplification, where you run the risk of losing users to confusion. But on the other side, overstimulation leads to really crowded design with users inundated with unnecessary information and guidance and so forth. And finally, my problems with the study session setup were a great demonstration of the trade-off between the speed achieved by providing limited options and the slowing of pace which comes from extensive customization. However, I hope that as I progress, I will learn how to create balanced designs between these extremes or even discover imaginative ways to circumvent them entirely. Many thanks for your time. I hope you enjoyed my presentation.